A woman steps out into a pitch-black street, raises a long rubber tube to her mouth, and starts firing dried peas at a second-story window. She won't stop until a groggy face appears. She isn't a vandal. Her name is Mary Smith, and she's a human alarm clock. She and her daughter Molly Moore were part of a bizarre, highly visible gig economy. They were known as knocker-uppers. For decades, workers gladly paid a few pence a week to have their windows rattled before dawn. In the brutal new world of mechanized labor, being late meant losing your wage. But if the entire industrial machine relied on these people to wake up, who was waking them? We'll get to that. This biological shock to the system was entirely new. Before factories, human life ran on task-oriented solar time. You worked until the job or the daylight was done, and you slept in whatever segments your body demanded. Historian A. Roger Airkirch argues that for centuries we naturally slept in two distinct blocks. This involved a first sleep and a second sleep, separated by an hour or more of nighttime wakefulness. What did people do in the middle of the night? They didn't just lie there in the dark. They read, they talked, they smoked, or they stoked the fires to keep the house warm. Airkirch traced roughly 2,000 mentions of this pattern. He found it as far back as Livy's History of Rome and Plutarch's Life of the Themistocles. Virgil's Aeneid even explicitly mentions the specific hour that terminates the first sleep. Not all historians agree. Niall Boyce and others argue this evidence is cherry-picked, challenging the idea that segmented sleep was universal. But whether it was a strict biological rule or just a very common habit, one fact is undeniable. The 19th century completely shattered whatever natural rhythm we had left. Two things destroyed this natural rhythm: artificial light and synchronized labor. First, gas lamps and later electric illumination spread across cities. This completely erased the long, dark winter nights that made a wakeful interval biologically natural.
Then came the factories. Factories didn't work like farms. You couldn't just stroll in when you felt rested. Shipbuilding and textile mills demanded extreme, rigid shifts. If the machines started at 6 a.m., every single worker had to be standing at them at exactly 6 a.m. The transition was physically crushing. Children were regularly working 12-hour days. The British government spent half a century trying to regulate this. It took 7 separate legislative acts across 45 years. They passed the 1802 Apprentice Act to ban night work for kids, but with zero enforcement, factories simply ignored it. Decades of subsequent laws were routinely evaded until Parliament finally created a real inspectorate in 1833. But while politicians fought over labor laws, the market had a more immediate problem. Affordable, reliable personal alarm clocks didn't really exist yet. The first mechanical alarm clock is often credited to American Levi Hutchins in 1787, but it was notoriously non-adjustable. The workers needed a solution. To bridge the gap between human exhaustion and relentless factory schedules, the knocker-ups walked the dark streets. It was a vast, informal economy built on pure physical endurance. People like Charles Nelson in East London worked the job for 25 years. He didn't just wake mill workers. He roused doctors, market traders, and drivers. The trade was incredibly prominent. By 1861, Charles Dickens was already dropping jokes about characters getting knocked up in Great Expectations. And yes, in Britain, knock you up traditionally just meant knocking on someone's door, a phrase that still causes real confusion for Americans. The physical tools of the trade were fascinating. English knocker-ups often tapped glass with wire-tipped bamboo poles. Meanwhile, their French and Italian counterparts blasted shrill whistles into the dawn. It was the ultimate Victorian hustle. Even police constables moonlighted on their early patrols just to supplement their pay. Yet polite society absolutely despised them. Social reformer Helen Dendy grouped knocker-uppers into what she called the residuum. She categorized them alongside step cleaners and baby minders. She deemed them unworthy of charitable aid, claiming they avoided regular work. The very people holding the industrial schedule together were treated as a lazy underclass.
Which brings us back to that unanswered irony. Who woke the knocker up? The historical record never answers this. The reality, many were simply night owls who slept during daylight hours until roughly 4 p.m. They destroyed their own natural rests so the industrial machine could run on time. The knocker-ups kept local mills running on local time, but the industrial machine was growing, and soon, local time wasn't good enough. For centuries, noon was just whenever the sun peaked in your town. That worked fine for horses, but for an expanding railway network, non-uniform local times didn't just mean a messed-up schedule, it was practically a death sentence. Imagine sending multi-ton steam engines hurtling down the exact same track, completely blind, because one station's clock is 15 minutes faster than the next. Deadly head-on collisions were a massive, terrifying risk. To fix this chaos, the Great Western Railway simply bypassed the government. In November 1840, they synchronized all their station clocks to Greenwich Mean Time. By 1847, the Railway Clearinghouse recommended all railway companies adopt GMT. They achieved near universal compliance in just 1 year. This is where time became an absolute standard. Once the trains ran on a synchronized grid, lateness was no longer a local calculation. The grace period vanished. This made the knocker-up's job even more rigid, as town halls and churches synchronized to the trains simply because railways had become society's timekeeping backbone. The government actually lagged decades behind this corporate takeover, creating massive legal confusion. In 1858, a legal case called Curtis versus March revealed the absurdity of the transition. A court ruled that local mean time was still officially binding in law, even as the trains outside ran on GMT. You had a legal system operating in a completely different reality than the physical infrastructure. Parliament didn't officially adopt GMT as Britain's national standard until 1880. Time was now fully industrialized, and in 1888, jeweler Willard Lou Grand Bundy patented the first mechanical time punch clock in New York. The timekeeping of the individual worker was officially mechanized. The mechanical alarm clock didn't create an overnight revolution. As late as 1914, newspapers lamented that cheap American clocks were only just killing the knocker-upper industry in London. The trades stubbornly survived in pockets of industrial England until the early 1970s. Today, the knocker-upper is gone. They were killed first by the factory whistle, then the mechanical clock, and finally, the smartphone. But the tension never left us. In 2024, nearly a third of U.S. adults sleep less than 7 hours a night. Barely half of us wake up actually feeling rested. And shift work disorder? It affects up to 43% of modern shift workers. The tools changed, but the master didn't. Every morning, when that alarm yanks you out of the dark, you're still just a worker answering to Mary Smith's pea-shooter.